The evening had barely begun when the restaurant's main hall started filling with people. Soft music played from hidden speakers, the kind that blended into the background so guests could focus on their drinks and conversations. Staff moved quickly, polishing glasses, arranging plates, making sure everything was set before the dinner rush. In the middle of all that noise and movement, a young worker swept the floor near the raised platform where an old grand piano stood. It was the restaurant's pride piece, a beautiful instrument with a polished surface that caught the light in a perfect shine. He tried not to look at it for too long. Every time he did, something inside him tugged, as if old memories were reaching out from a place he tried hard to lock away. So he kept his eyes down, focusing on the broom in his hands, hoping the night would pass like any other. But the peace didn't last. The restaurant owner walked in surrounded by a small group of wealthy guests. He enjoyed an audience and never wasted a chance to show off. His laugh echoed across the room long before he reached the center, and everyone, including the workers, knew the tone well. It meant he had spotted something, or someone he wanted to use for his entertainment. His eyes landed on the young worker sweeping the floor. "You there," the owner called out loudly, waving a hand as if summoning a pet. A few of his guests chuckled already, waiting to see what he had planned. The worker paused, straightened his posture, and turned, unsure what he had done wrong. The owner pointed at the piano behind him. "Tell me something," he said with a grin. "Do you know how much that instrument is worth?" The worker shook his head. He tried to keep his expression calm, though his heart was beating faster now. He didn't like being the center of attention, and he especially didn't like it when people laughed for reasons he didn't understand. "A fortune," the owner declared. "More than anything you've ever touched in your life. I promise you that." His guests laughed politely, some a bit too loudly. The worker felt his face warm with embarrassment. But he stayed quiet, and the owner leaned back with a smug smile. "Tell you what," he said, "I'll make you a deal." He placed one hand on the piano as if displaying a trophy. "I'll give you $1,000 if you can play a single note on this piano." A few guests gasped playfully. Some nudged each other. Others waited with amused smirks. They saw it as a joke. The owner clearly didn't expect anything. His voice carried that tone, the kind that said he already knew the outcome. He believed the worker would be too nervous or too inexperienced to even touch the keys. And deep down, he enjoyed the idea of watching someone stumble under pressure. The worker didn't answer right away. He looked at the piano, then at the owner, trying to understand why this challenge mattered so much to these people. He wasn't angry, just confused. Why would anyone offer such a large amount just to see someone tap a piano key? Then he realized they weren't expecting him to actually do it. They only wanted a moment of entertainment at his expense. His coworkers, watching from the sides, exchanged worried glances. They knew how the owner liked to embarrass employees when he was in a playful mood. One of the servers subtly shook her head at him, silently urging him to ignore the challenge. But another staff member whispered that refusing might make things worse. The air felt heavy with attention. The owner crossed his arms. "Well," he said loudly, $1,000 for one little tap. You don't even need talent. Just courage." More laughter. The worker took a slow breath. He didn't want to give them a show, but he also wasn't afraid of touching the piano. Not the way they assumed he would be. The instrument didn't intimidate him. What intimidated him was the thought of remembering, of letting his hands reconnect with something he had walked away from long ago. Still, he stepped forward. The room quieted slightly. Surprised that he wasn't backing down, he approached the platform, each step measured and careful. The polished wood reflected the warm lights above, and the piano itself looked almost too grand, too perfect. He reached out and brushed the edge lightly with his fingers. Feeling the smooth finish, the owner raised his eyebrows with a mocking smile. "Look at that," he said to his guests. "Maybe he'll actually try." The worker didn't respond. His focus drifted to the keys. He remembered sitting beside someone years ago, watching big, gentle hands guide his smaller ones across the same pattern of black and white. He remembered how the notes used to feel less like sound and more like breath. He pushed the memory aside. All they wanted was one note, that one simple touch. He pulled in a breath and lowered himself onto the piano bench. The seat was familiar, almost too familiar, and for a moment he paused, wondering if he should continue. Behind him, the guests whispered, amused, curious, entertained. The owner smirked. "Go on," he said. "Let's see if you can manage this impossible task." There was no kindness in his tone, only sarcasm, wrapped in confidence. The worker lifted his hand. He hovered it above the keys. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of returning to something he hadn't touched in a long time. Something he thought he had left behind for good. The room fell into a deeper silence. It was strange how quiet people became when they expected someone to embarrass themselves. The worker lowered his finger toward a single white key. Before he touched it, he could feel every eye on him. The guests waiting, the owner smiling, his co-workers holding their breath. Even the air seemed to pause. In that moment, he felt a mix of emotions: nervousness, pressure, and a faint spark of something he hadn't felt in years. Something warm, something sharp, something that came from his past, but he didn't let the emotions show. He only focused on the key. Then, with a soft and steady motion, he pressed down. A single, clear note rang out. It was simple, pure, clean. It drifted through the hall like a small drop of light. Gentle but unmistakable. No one expected it to sound like that. The owner's smirk faltered. The guests leaned forward. Something had shifted in the room, though no one could explain what or why. They only felt it: the sudden stillness, the strange quiet, the way the note seemed to carry more weight than $1,000 joke. The worker lifted his hand off the key, but the echo of the note lingered. He sat there silently, unsure whether he had just made things better or worse. He had followed the challenge. Exactly. One note. Nothing more. Yet somehow, that single sound felt like the beginning of something none of them saw coming. The sound of that single note had barely faded when the room slowly came back to life. It was as if everyone had been holding their breath at the same moment, expecting something to go wrong, expecting the young worker to mess up or freeze. But instead, they heard a clean tone, simple yet strangely beautiful, and it left them unsure of how to react. Some of the guests exchanged glances, not quite willing to admit they felt something unexpected. Others simply stared, waiting for the owner to say something. He usually liked to turn moments like this into a joke, but even he looked caught off guard. The worker remained seated at the piano. His hand rested on his lap now, still trembling a little from the tension of the moment. He didn't look at the owner or the guests. He just stared quietly at the keys, as if trying to calm the storm inside his chest. It wasn't the note itself that shook him. It was the memory that came rushing back the second his finger met the key. A memory he thought he had buried deep enough never to feel again. One of the guests finally broke the silence with a light laugh, trying to bring the mood back to what it had been. "Well, he did it," the guest said. "One note. You offered the challenge." Another person chuckled, but it wasn't the same kind of laughter as before. It sounded uncertain, almost uneasy. No one expected the moment to carry weight. No one thought a simple act could shift the room like that. The owner took a slow breath, trying to pull back his confidence. Yes, he said with a forced grin. "He played it." "I suppose he did. But he didn't reach for his wallet. He stood there, waiting, searching for a way to regain control of the moment. He liked being the center of attention, and right now the attention had drifted toward the worker, the one person he never intended to highlight. The worker finally stood up from the bench. He kept his head down, not wanting to look at anyone. The moment had stretched longer than he wanted, and he wished he could slip back into the quiet tasks he was used to. He didn't want praise. He didn't want questions. He only wanted this uncomfortable spotlight to disappear. The owner cleared his throat. "A deal is a deal," he said at last, though the words lacked enthusiasm. "I'll get your money." He turned toward one of the staff members nearby, signaling for them to bring him his briefcase. The worker watched quietly, feeling unsure whether to stay or step away. Before he could decide, one of the guests asked, "Do you play more than that one note?" The question wasn't mocking. It carried real curiosity. The worker's shoulders tensed, and he didn't answer. He didn't know how to explain the mess of emotions that hit him when he touched the piano. How could he tell them that the piano wasn't just an instrument to him? It was a doorway to a life he once lived, one filled with music, warmth, and someone he admired deeply. A second guest chimed in. "It sounded like you knew what you were doing." The worker gave a small shake of his head, trying to push away the attention. "I don't really play anymore," he said softly. His voice was quiet, but clear enough for those closest to hear. One of the servers, who had watched the entire scene from a distance, stepped forward subtly. She had worked with the young man long enough to sense when something troubled him. She sensed it now. She wanted to break the tension for his sake. "He still needs to finish cleaning the hall," she said gently. "Can he return to his work?" Several guests nodded politely, but a few kept staring as if expecting him to return to the piano at any moment. The worker stepped down from the platform, gripping the side rail quietly. His hands felt cold, almost numb. He tried to focus on steadying his breathing, reminding himself that this would soon pass and the night would go back to normal. The owner finally received his briefcase from the staff member and began counting the money. He did it slowly, almost reluctantly, as if each bill he pulled out weighed more than it should. When he finished, he walked toward the worker. The guests watched eagerly, ready to see how the moment would end. The owner held out the stack of bills. "Here," he said, $1,000, just like I promised." The worker hesitated for a long second before taking it. He didn't ask for applause or gratitude. He didn't even feel excited. He just felt odd, like the money didn't belong to him, like the moment meant something far bigger than what he understood. He tucked the cash carefully into his pocket and bowed his head slightly. "Thank you," he whispered. The owner forced a smile. "Well, next time maybe you'll give us something more interesting than just one note." He said it with a half-joking tone, but the worker could hear the hint of challenge behind it. He didn't respond. He just returned to sweeping the floor, trying to settle back into the quiet rhythm he preferred. But the guests didn't go back to normal just yet. They kept stealing glances his way, whispering in low voices. Some seemed impressed. Others seemed confused. A few even seemed moved, though they didn't want to admit it out loud. It wasn't the money or the challenge that stuck in their minds. It was the way he had pressed the key gently, yet fully present. Like someone touching a memory dot as he swept, the worker felt their eyes on him. It made his heart beat faster. He tried to pretend he didn't notice, but the pressure grew heavier. He moved to another part of the hall, hoping distance would help. But even there, he couldn't escape the thoughts swirling in his mind. Why had he accepted the challenge? Why didn't he walk away, like he usually did from situations that put him on the spot? Maybe it was the way the owner spoke, or the laughter, or the reminder of everything he had tried to leave behind. Maybe the moment hit him differently, because deep down, He still loved music more than anything, even if it hurt to admit. He reached a quiet corner of the hall and slowed down, resting both hands on the broom handle. He closed his eyes for a moment. The sound of the note echoed again in his memory. It was so clear, so gentle, and it felt like a voice calling from the past. A voice he missed. He took another breath and tried to shake off the feeling, but it stayed. He remembered the afternoon spent learning piano from someone patient and kind, someone who always encouraged him, even when he made mistakes, someone who made the music feel alive. That person wasn't here anymore. That was why he stopped playing. Back near the platform, the guests were still discussing the moment. One of them pointed at the piano and whispered something about how strange it was that a simple note could sound so full. Another wondered aloud if the worker had ever played before. A third suggested that maybe he had been a student once. The owner overheard parts of the conversation. It bothered him slightly, though he couldn't explain why. He didn't like losing attention. And for a moment, he had. The spotlight had drifted, if only briefly, to someone he didn't consider important. He clapped his hands loudly to regain control of the atmosphere. "All right, everyone," he said with a cheerful tone. "Drinks are ready. Let's get the night started." The guests moved toward the bar area, conversations shifting to lighter topics. Slowly, the tension faded from the room. The music from the speakers played softly again, and the staff returned fully to their duties. But one thing didn't return to normal: piano. Even though the room was lively again, the piano seemed to hold a strange presence now, as if the single note the worker played still floated around it, refusing to disappear. The worker couldn't stop glancing at it from time to time. Not because he wanted to play more, not because he wanted attention, but because the instrument felt familiar in a way he couldn't ignore anymore. He had avoided pianos for so long, but sitting at one again felt like stepping into a room he once knew very well. He wasn't sure if he liked that feeling. A staff member approached him quietly. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. He nodded quickly, though the truth was more complicated. "I'm fine," he said. "Just thinking." She smiled kindly. "You did well. Better than any of us expected." He didn't agree or disagree. He just returned to his work, sweeping slowly. That night would continue as usual, with laughter, music, and busy tables. But something in the worker's heart had shifted, something he couldn't put back the way it was. And even though he didn't know it yet, that simple note, the one he played without meaning to impress, was about to change far more than just the mood in the room. It would open a door he thought he had closed forever. It would lead him back to a part of himself he thought he had lost, and it would be only the beginning. The rest of the night moved forward as it usually did, but for the young worker, nothing felt the same. Every sound in the hall seemed sharper. Every step he took felt heavier. Even the soft music coming from the speakers bothered him a little. It wasn't wrong or unpleasant. It just didn't feel real compared to the single note he had played earlier. That note was still ringing somewhere inside him, refusing to leave. When the dinner rush finally ended, the hall grew quieter. Most of the guests had gone home, and only a few remained chatting at their tables. The owner was busy entertaining someone near the bar, laughing loudly as always. The worker used this moment to finish wiping down the remaining tables. He moved slowly, still lost in his thoughts. He didn't want to think about the piano, but it stayed in his mind like a shadow following every step. What bothered him wasn't the challenge or the laughter. It was the strange feeling that touched him when he sat on that bench. The old memory he tried so hard to keep buried had pushed through the moment. His finger touched the key dot as he wiped the last table. He glanced at the piano again. Now that the hall was mostly empty, the instrument seemed even more inviting. Standing quietly in the center of the room, like it was waiting for something or someone. The lights above created a warm glow over its polished surface, making it look soft and gentle instead of grand and intimidating dot just then. One of the servers walked past him and whispered, "You know, the way you played that note." It was different. Not like someone just tapping a key. He looked at her with a small, unsure smile. It was just a note. She shook her head lightly. Maybe to you, but not to the rest of us. She gave him an encouraging smile before heading into the kitchen. The worker watched her go, feeling a mix of confusion and discomfort. He didn't want attention. He didn't want praise. All he wanted was to finish his shift quietly and go home. But even that felt impossible now. A few minutes later, the owner called out from the bar, "You, come here for a moment." The worker tightened his grip on the cloth he was holding. He placed it aside, took a breath, and walked toward the owner. The owner stood with a drink in his hand, leaning against the counter. "I've been thinking," he said, his tone casual but sharp. That moment earlier, people seemed entertained by it. The worker didn't say anything. The owner took another sip of his drink. "Maybe you should do that again sometime," he said. "Not a whole performance or anything. Just a note or two to make people smile. It could add something to the atmosphere." The worker felt his heart drop a little. He didn't want the piano to become some kind of trick he was expected to perform. "I don't think I can," he said softly. The owner laughed. "Can't? It's just pressing a key. Anyone can do that." "That's not what I mean," the worker replied carefully. The owner waved a hand, dismissing the seriousness in the worker's voice. "Think about it. It could be fun. People will talk about it. Maybe I'll even raise your pay if you keep the guests entertained." He grinned as if the idea sounded perfect. The worker forced a polite nod, even though the idea made him uncomfortable. "I'll think about it," he said. "Good," the owner replied, turning back to his drink. The worker walked away quietly, returning to the hall. He didn't want to stay any longer, but he still had tasks to finish before leaving. Someone had to sweep. Someone had to gather the remaining glasses. Someone had to double-check the seating area. Tonight, that someone was him. He picked up his broom and began sweeping again, moving in slow, steady lines. His thoughts kept drifting to the piano, to the memory of sitting at a different piano in a different place, with someone guiding his hands. It was a memory filled with warmth and comfort, until it wasn't. He remembered the laughter of the person who taught him. The way they always said, "Music doesn't come from your hands. It comes from your heart." The memory brought a tightness to his chest. He tried to push it away, but it stubbornly stayed as he swept closer to the piano. He paused for a moment. The room was quiet now. The guests had left. The staff had gone to the back to finish last-minute chores. Even the owner was nowhere to be seen. He looked around. No one was watching. He took a small step toward the piano. He didn't sit down. Not at first. He just stood there, staring at the keys, wondering why this instrument had the power to pull him back so easily after he had avoided it for so long. His hand lifted slowly, almost unconsciously, as if drawn by something deeper than memory. He touched the edge of the piano lightly. The surface felt cool under his fingers. Another breath. He hesitated. Then, without fully deciding to, he sat down on the bench. His heart beat faster. His hands rested gently on his knees, unsure of what to do next. The silence felt too heavy. But it didn't scare him. Instead, it made him feel strangely calm. He lifted his right hand and hovered it above the same key he had pressed earlier. His finger trembled. He closed his eyes. This time, he didn't play the note. He didn't need to. Just feeling the closeness of the instrument was enough to bring the past flooding back. He remembered learning his first song. He remembered struggling with the rhythm, and getting frustrated, only for someone to pat his shoulder and remind him that mistakes were part of growing. He remembered the joy of finally playing a tune correctly, the way the room had filled with pride and laughter. Then he remembered the day everything changed. The day the house fell silent. The day the piano sat untouched in the corner, collecting dust while he sat on the floor. Holding on to the memory of someone he had lost, he quickly opened his eyes, pulling himself out of the memory before it became too heavy. "Are you all right?" A soft voice asked from behind. The worker jumped slightly. He turned and saw one of the staff members standing a few steps behind him. She had come out from the back hallway and noticed him sitting there. "I'm fine," he said quickly, standing up from the bench. "I was just resting." She nodded. "It's okay. You don't have to explain." She looked at the piano, then back at him. "You know, if there's something you miss about playing, it's all right to admit it." He looked away. "I don't play anymore." She didn't argue. She just offered a gentle smile. "All right. But if you ever change your mind, that piano is always here." He didn't respond. The staff member headed back toward the kitchen, leaving him alone again. He looked at the piano one last time. Then he stepped away from it, forcing himself not to look back. His shift finally ended. He grabbed his bag from the staff locker area and made his way out of the building. The night air felt cool and calming compared to the stuffy atmosphere inside. He breathed deeply, trying to steady the emotions tangled inside him. As he walked down the quiet street toward his small home, he kept replaying the moment he touched the key. The sound, the memory, the feeling. It was confusing, painful, and strangely comforting all at once. He told himself he wouldn't go near the piano again. He didn't want to open old wounds. He didn't want the past dragging him back. But deep down, he knew the truth. That single note had awakened a part of him he wasn't ready to face. And whether he liked it or not, the piano wasn't finished with him yet. Here is part 4 written in simple, clear, human-sounding language as a separate document, with no headings, no restricted names, and no policy-violating content. The next morning arrived with a strange, restless energy in the town. People talked about the event from the night before, as if it were some kind of rare moment they were lucky to witness. Some said the young player had talent beyond his years. Others said the millionaire had been humbled for the first time in his life. And some just enjoyed the surprise of seeing something unexpected happen in their quiet community. But for the young player, none of that mattered right now. He woke up with a sense of pressure building inside him. The words of the millionaire kept replaying in his mind, especially the moment when the man walked away, confused, almost shaken. It bothered him in ways he didn't expect. He didn't want the moment to turn into a fight or rivalry. He only wanted to show what music meant to him. Still, he could not deny the weight that had been placed on his shoulders. The millionaire had promised $1,000 if he played one note, but the moment had changed into something much larger. The crowd expected more. The town expected more. Even the millionaire, wherever he was, probably expected something too. He stepped outside and felt the cool air touch his face. The road was quiet, but he sensed that people were waiting not for him, exactly, but for what would happen next. He walked toward the small spot near the old building where the piano had been left the night before. To his surprise, the piano was still there, covered with a sheet someone had placed gently over the keys. He walked closer and removed the cloth. The piano looked older in the daylight, worn around the corners, but full of character. He ran his fingers lightly across the keys without pressing them. He wasn't ready yet. Not until he cleared his thoughts. He sat on the small bench and rested there, listening to the distant sounds of the town waking up. A few birds. A shop door opening. A man sweeping the sidewalk. These simple sounds grounded him. He remembered how nervous he had felt when the crowd gathered around him the night before. His hands had shaken at first. He had wondered whether he should walk away. But then he remembered why he loved music in the first place. It wasn't for the money or the attention. It was because music helped him express things he couldn't say out loud. It helped him breathe. It helped him feel less alone. He closed his eyes and let himself remember the simple moments when music had saved him, late nights practicing in empty rooms, mornings playing soft tunes to wake himself up, afternoons when he played to calm his restless mind. Every part of his life had been shaped by sound. He opened his eyes when he heard someone approaching. An older man stood a few steps away, watching quietly. "Are you going to play today?" the man asked with a gentle tone. "Maybe," the young player replied. "People are waiting," the man said, but not in a demanding way. It was more like he wanted to prepare him for what might come. The young player didn't respond. He simply nodded. The older man smiled and walked away, leaving him alone again. But the words stuck with him. People were waiting. He didn't want to disappoint anyone, but he also didn't want the moment to feel forced. After some time, he stood up and walked away from the piano, deciding he needed a little more time before facing the crowd again. He walked through the market area, passing by small shops and street vendors. Some people recognized him and whispered to each other, but no one stopped him or interrupted him. They gave him space, which he appreciated. He reached the edge of the market where a woman sold handmade crafts. She looked up at him and smiled. "You played beautifully last night," she said. He felt shy hearing that. "Thank you." "You know," she continued, "sometimes moments like these come into our lives to test us. Not to bring us down, but to help us grow." He didn't quite know how to respond, but her words stayed with him as he kept walking. He turned down a smaller road and found himself thinking again about the millionaire. The man's expression from the night before was burned into his memory. It was not anger, it was something else. Something like disbelief mixed with frustration, mixed with curiosity. He wondered if the man had ever truly listened to music the way he did. Maybe the millionaire saw music as a game, a challenge, or a way to show power. Maybe he didn't understand how deeply music could touch someone. Still, the young player couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more behind the man's smirk. It wasn't just arrogance. It looked like he was hiding something under it. By midday, more people had gathered around the piano, even though he hadn't returned yet. Kids sat on the ground waiting. Adults stood around talking quietly. Word spread fast in small towns. He finally returned, walking slowly through the crowd as they parted to let him through. Some of them smiled. Some nodded respectfully. Some simply watched. He sat at the piano again, taking a deep breath. He still didn't press the keys. He looked up at the crowd. "I'm not sure what people want to hear," he said honestly. A woman near the front replied, "Just play from your heart." Those simple words touched him more than he expected. They gave him a kind of permission he didn't know he needed. He placed his fingers on the keys and finally played a soft, warm melody. It wasn't loud or showy. It didn't try to impress anyone. It was gentle, steady, full of quiet emotion. The crowd fell silent, listening intently. The young player's movements were natural, calm, and confident. Every note came from a place deep inside him. He didn't rush the music. He let each sound breathe on its own, giving the melody space to settle in the air. People watched him with full attention. Some closed their eyes. Some smiled softly. Some felt chill bumps run down their arms. Halfway through the piece, a shadow appeared at the edge of the crowd. The millionaire. He stood with his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. Some people noticed him and whispered, but no one said anything out loud. Everyone's attention stayed on the young player. The millionaire slowly walked closer, stopping right behind the front row. He didn't interrupt. He didn't make a comment. He just listened. The young player saw him from the corner of his eye, but he didn't stop. He didn't let it shake him this time. He continued the melody, letting it rise and fall like a gentle wave. The longer he played, the more it felt like everything, the pressure, the expectations, the fear faded away. For once, it was just him and the music. When he reached the final note, he let it ring softly in the air before lifting his hands. The crowd erupted into warm applause, but the millionaire didn't clap. He stepped forward. The crowd quieted. The young player looked up at him. Unsure of what would happen next, the millionaire stared at the piano for a long moment before speaking. "That's not just talent," he said quietly. "That's something else." No one expected those words from him, not even the young player. The millionaire looked around at the crowd, then back at the young player. "Meet me tomorrow," he said. "I have something important to discuss with you." And without another word, he walked away again. The crowd murmured in confusion, curiosity, and excitement. The young player's heart beat fast. Whatever this meant, it was clear the story wasn't over. It was only getting deeper. The hall was filled with a quiet kind of excitement that night, the kind that didn't shout but hummed softly in the air. It wasn't a special event or a grand celebration. It was just an ordinary evening where people came to enjoy food, music, and comfort. But to the young worker standing behind the counter, nothing about the night felt ordinary anymore. Ever since the moment he played the full piece on the piano, things had begun to change around him in ways he never expected. People treated him differently, some with admiration, others with curiosity. The owner acted proud of him, even though he still used the piano moment to impress guests. The staff treated him with a new kind of respect, and strangers who came into the hall sometimes whispered about the worker who played like a professional. But the biggest change was the one happening inside him. It had been days since the performance, but the memory of it stayed fresh. The warmth he felt while playing, the way the music made him forget everything else. The sudden applause that filled the room, it all stayed with him like a soft echo he carried everywhere. At first, he didn't know what to do with that feeling. For years, he had pushed music away. He had avoided pianos, avoided memories, avoided anything that reminded him of the person who taught him to play. But now, he found that the memory didn't hurt as much. Instead, it felt like someone close to him was gently encouraging him again, telling him he could still move forward. Still, he didn't want to rush. He wanted to understand what he truly felt. That night, as he arranged the last stack of clean glasses near the counter, one of the regular customers approached him. The customer was an older man who often came in wearing a quiet smile and carrying a notebook filled with sketches. "I heard you play the other day," the man said warmly. "It was beautiful." The worker looked up, startled. Thank you." "You know," the man continued, "some people spend their whole lives trying to play with emotion. But you already have it. That can't be taught." The worker lowered his eyes. "I just played what I remembered. That's what made it special," the man said. He gave a gentle nod before walking back to his table. The worker watched him leave, feeling both shy and encouraged. It was strange how a few kind words could carry so much weight. As the night went on, the hall slowly began to empty. The kitchen closed. The lights dimmed. The soft music playing through the speakers faded. And once again, the piano sat at the center of the room, quiet and waiting. The worker stayed behind to clean, as he often did. He picked up plates, wiped tables, and swept the floor. All the while, he kept glancing at the piano, the same way someone might look at an old friend they weren't sure they were ready to speak to. He tried to ignore it, but he couldn't. Finally, When everything else was done, and the hall was almost silent, he walked toward the piano without thinking. His steps were slow but steady. He wasn't afraid anymore. He wasn't unsure that he was ready. He sat down on the bench and let out a long breath. The room felt peaceful. No crowds, no expectations. No owner standing nearby, waiting to brag about him. It was just him and the piano, like the old days. He placed his hands on the keys. Not to perform, not to impress anyone, not to prove anything. He played because he finally wanted to. The first few notes were soft and simple. His hands moved slowly, remembering the touch, the weight, the sound. He closed his eyes and let the music guide him. With every note, a piece of his past returned: warm moments, laughter, lessons, encouragement. And with every note, he also felt something new: freedom, acceptance, hope. He wasn't playing a song he had learned. He wasn't repeating something from memory. He was creating something of his own. The melody rose gently, not loud or dramatic, but full of emotion. The sound echoed across the empty hall like a quiet conversation between him and the instrument, one he had been afraid to have for too long. As he played, he didn't notice the owner standing in the doorway. The owner had come out from his office to lock up and was drawn to the sound. But unlike before, he didn't shout or brag or interrupt. He simply watched quietly, surprised by the softness of the moment. After a while, the melody faded, and the worker lifted his hands from the keys. He stayed still for a moment, breathing deeply, letting the last note settle inside him. The owner finally spoke. "You really love the piano, don't you?" The worker turned in surprise. "I didn't know anyone was here." The owner stepped closer. That was different. Not like before. That came from somewhere deep. The worker didn't know how to answer. He looked down, unsure if he wanted to share something personal. The owner took a breath. "Listen, I know I made a joke that day. I know I tried to make you play just to entertain people. But I didn't understand then." He paused. "I do now." The worker looked up slowly. "You're not just playing the piano," the owner continued. "You're speaking through it." The hall fell quiet. The worker didn't expect words like that from the owner, not someone who usually focused only on money and attention. But the owner's expression was sincere. "So," the owner said carefully, "if you ever want to play again, not for money, not for the audience, but for yourself, the piano is yours, anytime, even after hours." The worker felt something warm in his chest. Gratitude, relief, something close to peace. "Thank you," he said softly. The owner nodded, then gave a small smile. "You're full of surprises, you know that?" The worker smiled back, just a little. Together, they closed up the hall and stepped outside into the cool night. The sky was clear, and the air felt fresh. The worker walked home with lighter steps than he had in a long time. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know where music would take him, or how deeply he would return to it. But he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't afraid of the piano anymore. In fact, he was finally ready to welcome it back into his life. As he reached his small home and unlocked the door, he paused for a moment, thinking of everything that had happened. The challenge, the laughter, the applause, the memories, the music. He smiled softly to himself. Maybe life had a strange way of bringing things back at the right time. And maybe, just maybe, that single note he played at the beginning wasn't just a moment. It was the beginning of an entirely new chapter. He stepped inside, closed the door gently behind him, and felt a quiet sense of hope that the piano had found him again. And this time, he wasn't letting go.